Hey everyone! Welcome to the Open Question. People often think Satan has always been part of religious stories, like he's been there from the beginning. But the truth is, Satan had to be invented. He had to be shaped, developed, and made useful. He didn't just show up one day. The idea of a devil wasn't dropped from the sky. It evolved slowly and for very human reasons. In early religious texts, there was no clear devil figure. The Hebrew Bible, which forms the basis of many later religions, barely talks about Satan as people know him today. The word Satan originally just meant accuser or adversary. And it wasn't even a name. It was a job title. Someone who challenged humans in court, like a kind of prosecutor working under God, not against him. He wasn't evil. He wasn't red. He didn't have horns or a pitchfork. He wasn't tempting people. He was doing his job. Testing, questioning, maybe even helping to refine people's faith. The story of Job is a perfect example. Satan appears there, but not as some independent evil force. He's part of God's counsel. And God allows him to test Job's faith. It's more like a bet between colleagues than a war between good and evil. That's a long way from the modern idea of Satan. So how did we get from a divine tester to the prince of darkness? It's because religion needed a villain. A way to explain suffering, rebellion, doubt, temptation, without blaming the God at the center of it all. You can't sell people the idea of an all-powerful, loving being who lets horrible things happen without giving them someone else to point to. So, the role of Satan expanded. He became the scapegoat for everything that didn't make sense. He filled in all the uncomfortable gaps. As religions spread and gained power, they also needed control. People needed to stay in line. If you wanted to guide their behavior, fear worked better than hope. Telling people they'll be rewarded later isn't enough. Telling them they'll be punished, tortured, or burned for eternity if they step out of line. That sticks. That shapes choices. That keeps people obedient. So, Satan became the ultimate threat, an eternal enemy, and that fear became a tool, a very effective one. The image of Satan most people think of now didn't even come from religious texts. It came from art, from literature, from folklore, and from power struggles. The horns, the red skin, the tail, the goat legs. Those came later. Some from older pagan gods that were demonized by new religions. The god Pan, for example, wild, sexual, goat-like, was an easy target. You take what people fear or don't understand, and you paint your enemy with those features. Over time, it creates a strong mental picture, one that's easy to use when you want to frighten people into obedience. During the Middle Ages, Satan became a celebrity villain. Books, plays, sermons, everything built him up. People were told he was always watching, always whispering, always looking for a way in. It created paranoia. People didn't just fear evil acts. They feared thoughts, desires, doubts. You didn't need to commit a crime. Thinking the wrong thing was enough to be under Satan's influence. That level of psychological control can't be overstated. It turned religion into a full-time surveillance system where guilt and shame did all the heavy lifting. The witch hunts made it even worse. Thousands of people, mostly women, were tortured and killed because they were accused of working with Satan. But those accusations weren't about real evidence. They were about fear, control, and targeting people who were different, difficult, or inconvenient. A woman who owned land, had knowledge of herbs, or didn't obey authority could be called a witch. All you had to do was say she made a pact with the devil, and she could be silenced, erased, or publicly burned. That wasn't about religion. That was about power. The invention of Satan wasn't just about scaring people. It was also about dividing them. Good versus evil. Us versus them. If someone didn't believe what you believed, they were under Satan's influence. If someone questioned the system, they were dangerous. And if you could label them as evil, you didn't have to listen to them. You could shut them down without discussion. This wasn't just a tool for spiritual control. It was a political weapon, too. Even today, in modern religious communities, the idea of Satan still shows up in conversations about people who leave the faith, people who question traditions, or people who live differently. It's a way to keep people in line without addressing the actual issues. If someone walks away from religion, it's easier to say the devil got to them than to ask why they left. It's easier to call doubt a temptation than to look at the cracks in the system. Satan also became a placeholder for anything people didn't like. Music, sex, dancing, tattoos, science, questions, all of it could be labeled satanic. You don't need to understand it if you've already decided it's evil. You don't have to debate it if it's coming from the devil. This shortcut thinking creates easy enemies and shallow solutions. It makes the world small, divided, and fearful. Ironically, the more you look at how Satan has been used, the more you realize he was never about truth. He was about usefulness. A character shaped by the needs of the system. Not a real being, but a reflection of the anxieties of those in charge. If your God is all good, all-powerful, and still lets bad things happen, you have a problem. Satan solves that. If people are asking hard questions, Satan distracts them. If someone is challenging the status quo, Satan silences them. He's the perfect scapegoat because he's invisible and can be blamed for anything. And it worked. For a very long time. But the cracks are showing. People are starting to question not just Satan, but the whole system that needed him. If a religion needs an all-powerful evil enemy to survive, what does that say about its foundation? If you need to scare people into staying, how strong is the belief, really? If your moral compass depends on threats of eternal punishment, how deep is the morality? The invention of Satan tells us more about human psychology than it does about the cosmos. It tells us how fear can be manufactured, how myths can evolve into control systems, how symbols can be weaponized, and how people can be taught to distrust themselves, their thoughts, their desires, just to fit into a mold designed by someone else. Some people try to argue that even if Satan isn't real, the idea of evil is. But that only proves how deeply the myth has embedded itself. Evil exists, yes. But it doesn't need a name, a face, or a pitchfork. It doesn't need flames or horns. It shows up in human actions, in cruelty, in indifference, in manipulation. And it can be fought, not with rituals or prayers, but with reason, with empathy, with understanding. You don't need to believe in Satan to stand against evil. In fact, letting go of that story might make you better at it. The more you study the origins of Satan, the more clearly you see how much of religion is built on metaphor mistaken for reality. And how often those metaphors were used to protect power, not people. Satan wasn't discovered. He was created, shaped like clay to fit every crack that logic couldn't fill. And maybe that's the real danger, not in the devil himself, but in how quickly we accept made-up enemies when they make life easier to explain, when they give us someone to blame, when they take responsibility off our shoulders and hand it to a myth. Because when you stop believing in Satan, you don't just lose a villain. You start to see where the real problems come from. And they're not hiding underground. They're right here. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.